Hey everybody, thanks for joining me here today. This is Nicole with Topaz, and today's session is all about understanding creative and output sharpening. We will be focusing in on Topaz Detail, the program that we suggest in our workflow of products to use for both of these steps. Image sharpening is a tool that can really emphasize certain areas in your image, whether it's texture or the subject itself, drawing your viewer focus in. But not all of the sharpening techniques out there are the same. Most image sharpening software tools work by using something called an unsharp mask. And basically that works by exaggerating the brightness difference along the edges within an image. And it does give the appearance of sharpness. And if you really use it well, or effectively, it looks good. The key to having it stay effective is balancing on the edge between making those edges appear sharper and avoiding some of those negative artifacts or over sharpening areas. They almost look like halos, and you want to avoid those definitely in your sharpening. And Topaz Detail uses a completely different technique and in many ways makes the process easier. It eliminates the need for such careful sharpening of your image, really walking that balanced line and having to sit there and really come up with very technical sharpening workflows. So we're going to go over how detail helps to make that process easier and how it allows for you to enhance that natural detail without having to worry about those halos or over sharpening. So let me tell you the few steps of the sharpening workflow really quickly. We have capture sharpening, creative sharpening, and output sharpening. Today we are focusing on the last two, creative and output. But just in case you're wondering, capture sharpening is really addresses any blurring that's caused by the image source. So while you're taking the image, sometimes the sensor will actually very slightly blur the image. So whenever you are bringing your image into the beginning of the workflow process, actually taking it in and working with the sharpening just for that slight image blur will help to make the sharpening process as you go through much easier. And so breaking it down into several steps really allows for you to be able to focus just on the output sharpening right at the end versus having to start all over in your whole sharpening workflow. So capture sharpening is that first step. The next step is creative sharpening, and that's going to be a very broad use of sharpening. It's a creative look to your image overall, something that can add depth and dimensionality and change the look overall of your image. It's usually applied selectively to your image, and it's based on, you know, the actual image content. So we'll get into that here shortly. The last one is going to be output sharpening. And output sharpening has different settings that's going to be customized for the type of output that you're using, whether print or web, and it's going to be applied at the end of your editing workflow after you've resized your image, because resizing your image is going to change the perceived sharpness of your image. So we'll talk about both output sharpening for the web or internet as well as output sharpening for print. But first we're going to be talking about creative sharpening. So I'm going to go ahead and start off with this image here of this tree covered in some moss. And the reason that I think this would be a great image to work with is we have an area that has detail in our subject over here on the right. However, the detail is not very sharp by any means. So let's take a look at that at 100%. So even at 100%, you see that it's not very sharp. It's actually quite soft. And also, we have a very smooth area over here on the left-hand side where detail is definitely, we don't want to introduce detail in there or any sort of sharpening into that area. And you can really work with that well in Topaz Detail. So we're going to go ahead and hop on in by going to Filter, Topaz Labs, Topaz Detail. And detail has an interesting way of analyzing your image as you bring it in. And you can see this little plug-in pre-processing pop-up here. And what it's doing is breaking your image down into 3 different detail sizes. You have your small details, medium details, and large details. I'm going to come down here to the bottom right and press reset all to get to the original here. But this breakdown of detail is really what makes Topaz Detail unique and allows for you to come in and get a lot of enhancement in the overall creative sharpening of your image without actually having to worry at all about the halos or overshoots or brightening up those edges in your image like you would have to if you're using a different type of technique. So I pressed reset all. If you're unfamiliar with Topaz Detail, really quick, we're not going to be working over here on the left-hand side today, but if you are looking to create or to have more creative detail collection, which again is going to be more of your creative sharpening, you know, if you're trying to smooth out certain image, have stylized detail, we have all these great presets here for you that you can check out. You are looking at a new version of our Topaz Detail 3.2, and this is the latest release, and it's really focusing on an interface update and workflow tool update, such as this grid view to view all of your presets in. So lots of very cool tools for you to work with. We're not going to be over here today. We're going to be more technical. In the middle here, though, we do have our preview area where you can toggle back and forth between your original and your preview. You can toggle back in several ways. My favorite way is the space bar. And then over here on the right-hand side, you have up at the right of the preview area, you have your view tools, which are going to be really important when you're working with a more technical output detail especially. I like to view my detail selections at about 50% when I'm working both in creative and output sharpening. 100% is almost too zoomed in because you have to think, you know, if you print this out, are you really going to have your nose right up against the image? No, most likely you're going to be kind of moved back 5 or 6, 10 feet. And so that taking it to 50% kind of backs you off from that image. So I always think that 50% zoom level is pretty good. And again, that's zoom tools over here on the top right. Over to the right of that, we have our navigator where you can move around the box to show exactly what you want to look at here in the main preview area. And then below that are all the adjustment tools for you. So in this top one, we have our detail where the majority of the specific technology for Topaz Detail comes into play. Then we have our tone module, which can be additional tone tools such as contrast, selective contrast, different toning, luminosity toning, very cool stuff. Some more color tools here for you. Deblur, which will help you deblur just a tiny bit. It basically is smaller detail even than your small details. I rarely use the deblur. I find that small details are usually good enough, but if you see even smaller details that you want to manipulate, you can go into this deblur area. And lastly, we have our effect mask. And we're really going to be focusing in on our detail module and the effect mask module during this creative sharpening workflow. So with creative sharpening, I'm really focusing on the actual artistic intent of my photograph. It's visual. It's something that I can say, okay, I want this to look like it has more detail, so I'm going to add that through possibly my medium details. And so you can come in and you can work with the different size details and actually change the enhancements independently from each other and really get the look that you're after. And creative sharpening is all about the look. So I'm going to increase my medium details, which really work on the medium image features, and then my large details as well, which are going to work on the more structured details. And you'll see as I take the large details up, it's these really big detail sizes that really start to separate from one another. And if you ever wonder how each image is being broken down, you can just kind of move the sliders around to really see how it's affecting it and what size detail is being manipulated for that particular image. So I'm going to take my large details up quite a bit. My medium details really start to bring out some of the texture in those larger details. not the very fine texture, but these medium-sized features here. And I really see a lot of creative sharpening that I like there. So here's before and after, again before and after. So already I have a lot more depth and dimension to this image, and that's really what I wanted here on the right hand side. But one thing that I also really wanted was the sharpness to actually increase. And one way you can really get that out is the small details slider. Small details is something that I tend to not use all the time unless I'm working with something like this macro type of close-ups, or just if it's needed for the certain creative sharpening look that I'm after. I usually save the small details for the output process because it's a very simple slider to work with during the output sharpening part of my workflow. But for this image, because it started out soft, I think I'm still going to add some small details in to get some of that sharpness to come out of the individual texture of the leaves themselves. So I'll take this all the way up and all the way down so you can kind of see what's going on. Here's all the way to the left. Here's all the way to the right. And I hope you're noticing that I'm able to come in and really highly manipulate these areas without adding any of the more common halos or overshoots that you have to deal with other sharpening tools. And that's why we suggest Topaz Detail to really make an impactful creative sharpening difference here without having to worry about doing all those different types of selections that you might have to do within other tools or anything like that. So here's before, here's after. Let me show you that one more time. Before and after. So a really nice pop there. However, I do have some issues over here on the left side that I'm not really liking. I'm bringing out some of the pixels, especially down here on the lower left where you start to see some contrast within the tone itself. And you can really start to see that start to just pixelate almost. So to resolve that, you can do several things. We have this effect mask area, which I am definitely going to show you, but not for this particular workflow here. But we also have these boost sliders. The boost sliders that are underneath each one of the detail sliders gives you even more control over the details that are being manipulated in your image to create this this sharpening. So if I have my small details really boosted up to get some nice, very small texture coming out here. Here's before again. Here's after. And I'm going to go a little bit just kind of crazy with this so you really start to see some of the issues that might come over here on the left-hand side. Now if I take my small details boost to the left, what that's going to do is tell Detail that I want to remove enhancement from the very, very smallest small details, but keep it in the larger small details. So it's just decreasing the range of small details that are being affected. So even though I've taken my small details boost down and eliminated the issue that was happening over here, let me show you that one more time. So here you see it's all pixelated and kind of grungy. Let's go to 100% just so you can get a better idea of what's really happening here. So that's because my small details are all the way up at 0.97, but now as I take my small details boost down, you'll just start to see those removed and smooth out. However, if I go over here to the right, I still have a lot of small detail enhancement because of my small details still up there. So you can really manipulate the exact size detail that you want very quickly without having to worry about those sharpening artifacts or halos that you'll run into with other software tools. That's why, again, it's a great creative tool. The other thing that makes it a great creative sharpener is being able to manipulate the different size details without having to manipulate all the edges in your image. If you're using another software tool that doesn't break it down into different detail sizes like Detail does, then when you increase the sharpness, you're increasing the edges of all the different detail sizes, whether they're small or large. So you're popping out everything, and it can kind of start to look crunchy or a little bit too harsh on the eyes if you go too strong. But then on other areas, it looks good. So you have to go in and selectively apply it. Here, you don't have to go through that process if you don't want to. You can just say, okay, I want my medium details increased and my small details less increased, large details more increased, and get something that is more the artistic intent for your subject. And it's a very selective way of going about manipulating that detail to give you that type of sharpening. The other, let's go ahead and show you the effect mask. Let me reset all here. Let's go back to 100% to really get close in. And let's say, I have my medium details just to get some nice depth going through those medium features, large details, but then it's still way too soft from the actual texture, so I'm going to increase my small details. And I'm increasing it pretty high here. Here's before, here's after. At 50%, it looks quite nice here. Here's before and after. And now I see the issue happening over here on the left-hand side with all of these little pixelated areas coming through, and I want to remove that, but I don't want to take my small details boost down. So if you come across that situation where you say, but I like exactly what's happening over here on the right-hand side, we have something that will allow you to quickly and selectively apply it in just the areas that you want to, and that's in our effect mask. And you'll find that a lot of workflows for creative sharpening really focus in on the selective portion of that category, because it's really all about drawing your eye into exactly where you want it to go. And so that can really, really selecting just your subject or where you want to drive the viewer's eye can be really helpful in that. So within the effect mask, we have that within detail. So you don't necessarily need to use a layered program such as Photoshop or Photoshop Elements. Even within your Lightroom or other programs that might not have easy layer masks versus just selection tools, you can use this mask within detail to help you quickly select those areas. And one reason that we do suggest using detail versus another selection tool, even if you do have Photoshop, is this edge aware tool that makes it very easy to selectively add it exactly where you want it to go. So for this image, I would, let's go ahead and go back to 50%, or we'll go to our fit. That works great. If I want to brush it out over on this left-hand side, all I would do is come to my strength. All the way is 0 is black, 1 is white. I have a white mask that I'm starting off with, so I'll keep my strength at 0. Change my brush size and make it pretty big here. I'll take my hardness down for this main edge over here on the left. I'll keep my flow all the way at 1 and then my edge aware all the way at 1. And as long as my edge aware is at 1 and the crosshairs of my brush only go onto the colors that I want to affect, I can get a very exact mask in a very small amount of time. If you look over here on the left-hand side, you can see I just came on that edge of the tree itself and was able to keep all of those little branches, but I took out all of the really smooth area right there to the left. And now I'll just take my edge awareness down, my hardness up, and I'll just finish that off. And I can quickly get a very specific mask like that. So now here's before and after. It's only affecting the subject where I want my viewer's eye to go, and no longer affecting that smooth area where I don't want any sort of detail or sharpness manipulation. So that effect mask is definitely a really important step within the creative sharpening workflow that you might be using. So the other area of sharpening that I want to talk about, and that we get a ton of questions about is output sharpening. After your capture sharpening and now our creative sharpening, the image should basically look nice and sharp on their screen, but that doesn't necessarily mean after resizing it or printing it that it's going to look like the same sharpness that you're viewing. So let's first talk about output sharpening for sharing over the internet. And that really is all about just your screen viewing. And so let's say here at 100% or 50%, we're pretty happy with everything with our content sharpening, so I'm pretty happy there. So I'm going to say okay. Now that I'm done with my content or creative sharpening, now we focus in on the output sharpening. At this size that I've been working at the entire time, I'm happy with my sharpness because that makes sense. I've been working at it at this size. But as I reduce the size or increase the size, it's going to change the perceived sharpness of the image. So that means after I've resized, I need to go back in and apply additional sharpening in the areas that might need it. So here in image size, if I go down to 1200%, for example, or I'm sorry, 1200 pixels, you might not feel as though it is as sharp whenever we go to 100%. There's so many technical ways that you can actually go through this, but for me, I work pretty simply and I just view it on my screen at 100% or 50% and I say, okay, does this look good? Does it look sharp enough? Am I seeing any sort of sharpening issues? And if so, if I need to continue with my output sharpening, then I will. With Topaz Detail, we have a very simple way of working with output sharpening. And the reason that it's two different steps, even though you're using the same program, is because after you resize the image, it's going to analyze the image differently when you bring it back in the next time. So at a size of 3600 by 2400 pixels, it has separated your small, medium, and large details into certain categories. But now that we've changed this to 1200 pixels wide, it's going to have different size details. And that makes the output sharpening of your small details that much easier to not have to sit there and try to do all these different percentages and calculations. You can just continually work with that small details because it's going to analyze it for you in the end. So let's go ahead and press reset all. And for me, I really like to just do a very small detail enhancement, very limited if I'm working with my output sharpening and just need to add a little bit of extra output sharpening for certain areas. Let's go ahead and this is 100%, so I'm just paying attention over here on the right-hand side. So here's before and after. Again, before and after. This feels a little too sharp for me right now on my screen, but I'm hoping that you see an actual difference on your screen so you can see that before and after. And then at this point what I would do is go into my effect mask and actually just selectively sharpen this tree area because again I still, even though I'm doing output sharpening, do not need any sharpening area done on this left hand side. I only need it on my subject itself. So now at this point, well, let's just go ahead and do the effect mask really quickly. Okay, and now that I've put output sharpening on just the areas that I need it to be, I'll say okay. Now I'm happy with my sharpening at this size as well. So now that I'm at this 1200, now I feel better about uploading this to a photo sharing site or sending this to a client at this size with this sharpening method. But if I was sending it at 3600 pixels wide, I would have kept it at this sharpening because this looks good for me here at this size. So it's just dependent upon the size that you're working with. And again, for web stuff or just photo sharing sites, I find that just looking at it visually on your screen is going to be the best indication of whether something is too sharp or not sharp enough or is giving you any sort of negative effects or artifacts. The other output sharpening that we have is for print, which is definitely more complicated when it comes to all the different elements because you're not only dealing with the actual sharpening of the image itself, you are also depending somewhat on the type of paper, the printer itself, and not only that, but the look as well that you want to achieve on there. If you want it to have a bit more of a sharper effect versus a softer effect. So it's harder for me to kind of go into the technical aspects of an individual output sharpening for a print workflow. But I do have a couple of suggestions for sure. Number one, I would suggest going through the same process that we just went through for output sharpening for a web image, because it's basically the same thing. The difference is sometimes with a print, you'll find, or I tend to find, that you actually have to over sharpen for a print to feel as sharp as it does on your screen. So in the end, what you're looking at on your screen might actually feel a little bit too crunchy or a little bit too sharp. You might see just a few artifacts or too much edge brightness going on. But then on a print, it looks beautiful and it looks crystal clear and tack sharp. It just is so dependent upon all the different factors going into that. And because of it being so dependent on all those different factors, I also just use a visual method and a testing method to see what my my end result will be. So I'm kind of old school. I do test strips. If I'm doing a really archival large print, I'm not going to just print out the entire print and just hope that it looks good. What I'll do is I'll go ahead and do a test strip, and I'll just print out a small portion of the image and see how it's looking for my sharpness. And if it's not sharp enough, I'll go ahead and increase that sharpness, and if it's too sharp, I'll decrease that sharpness. And the same idea with the print size is the same idea with the web image size as well. If you're going for a smaller print, it's going to give you a perception of being softer if you don't go in and manipulate or sharpen your print one more time at the size that you're going to output it at, or you're going to print it at. And you can use Topaz Detail again for the same type of, or in the same type of workflow, just going in and working with that small detail just to give that little extra pop punch into the subject areas that you really want to bring the attention to. And it's really as simple as that. Just make sure that when you're using Topaz Detail as your output sharpener, and actually when you're using any tool as your output sharpener, you need to resize prior. For detail, it's very important because it's going to analyze those small details at a different size each time you take the image in at a different size. So I hope that gives you a better understanding of where you would use Topaz Detail for both your creative and your output sharpening, which tools within the program are going to be most useful for each type of sharpening, and why we have both types of sharpening available to you for Topaz Detail. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.